No.
You're done there, you can do it anyway.
All right, pledge allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call. Do we not need that?
Nope, there's no roll call, it's
No
just
roll
work
call.
session.
This is a work session, so we are in.
So you get to turn it over to Kevin.
All right, well, I'll turn it over to you and Joe, because
All right.
Joe
Schrader show.
that's what I hear, Joe's got a lot to say today.
Yep. Just for a real brief update to start off with, we just had 2 items listed. First being the long-range capital projects, which would really, it's not that long of range, it's more of a 5 to maybe 5 to 7 years. I was asked what the city utilities represent, and just for the general public, that would be water and sewer, storm sewer projects. So, and then the discussion of the ARPA funding, we can go into that a little bit more if you want, but really we've gotten some new information from the state on how they're doing some of their state ARPA money. So Joe will go through that when he gets into his presentation as well. So that's all I have to overview.
Mr. Schrader, fire away.
All right, we'll get the presentation up here and we'll get moving.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
Do you want a clicker?
Sure. So I'm quickly going to go over the 22 projects, potential future projects over the next 5 years, 4 to 5 years. Funding for those projects, and then we'll talk about ARPA and how it relates to the city of Mitchell in South Dakota. Just a quick item for your, so you know, roughly $600 million is being recommended by Governor Nome to go to state of South Dakota for water and sewer projects.
Fellow will gladly spend it all for it.
And that's all subject to legislation approval. So
Joe, do you think that we have any idea what that's going to be based on? Population, do you think? Or actual shovel-ready projects?
So DANR has criteria of initial grant, which I'll get into later, for a cap amount of projects or dollar amount of projects. And I'll get into that once we get further into this.
But it's good to point out it is timely discussion. That's why we wanted to have the work session now, because you're going to be rolling into these discussions in December and January.
Right. So what we've been told is that the ARPA money is going to be targeted in the first and second funding rounds coming up shortly. So the first one is in January. Second, I believe, is in March. And they basically want to have as much of the funds used or allocated by those meetings. So with that being said, we need to have, for our January 1st deadline, we'll be having hearings for these projects like we do with SRF projects, because all this money is being funneled through the SRF program. We'll have to have the majority of these conversations at I believe it'll be the December 20th council meeting. So you'll be seeing projects, rates, those types of things. That's why we want to have this prelim meeting before we get to that, so the less shock and on we can just talk about that we apply for these projects. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to do them. We do have the opportunity to back out if for some reason we don't get the funding that we thought we were going to get, and dependent on how large you actually do end up wanting to go with these projects.
But it gets you in the line that we need to be in order to be considered for alternate funding too.
So the projects on the screen are what we have planned for next year, either continuation from this year or a new project. We've talked about all these projects. Total dollar amounts for these are roughly $33.2 million, just to put in perspective how much we are planning to do next year. And we do have 2 very large projects on there, 2 $10 million plus with our storage tank project and our North Wastewater Treatment Plant project. First project, 23rd and Ullman, we actually did approve the design for this project in 22's budget. So this will be one that we apply for January 1. Estimated project cost of $1.1 million. The existing structure is roughly 50 years old, significant deterioration, and there is odor issues with this station as well.
That's a bit of an understatement.
Those poor neighbors of ours, oh my
They
goodness.
move every 6 months.
I know they do, they're gonna be so happy.
Yeah. And we do plan on moving it to the south side of the road. It's property that we own, and that could potentially free up a lot, potentially. Yep.
That won't create issues with water from the
Nope,
drainage?
because there's a large pad there that's on the path. We'll probably put it pretty close to the path, so we maintain our pond.
Yeah, because there's already they already have done all that trenching of water from years ago when they did
Yep.
that, right? There's
Yep.
a big drainage.
Yep.
It's perfect.
And we'll move through these pretty quick. If you want me to stop and explain anything more, just let me know. 13th and 12th, there's a water main loop. Right now, we're fighting water main breaks this last fall, so we think that'd be a good section to get replaced. Cost estimates 1.2, and this is just a water main project. The sewer is PVC. It's asbestos cement pipe. We'll replace all the service lines. The cost includes replacing half the street and associated curb and gutter and sidewalk and driveways if they're located in that area. We'll probably look at replacing the other half of the street with city funds if they are available. South Wastewater Treatment Plant. This is a project that was in HDR's our wastewater treatment facility plan. This project is $30 million. It's a big project. It's an investment going well, 40, 50 years into the future. This is something that needs to get done. There are probably $10 million worth of improvements that should be happening now. That we've been, trying to get by as much as we can so we can get our north plant completed, and then we move on to the south. So that time period, 23, 25 roughly. Highway 37 utilities. This will be in conjunction with the DOT's reconstruction project. Estimated cost is 1.7. This will install 3,100 feet of sewer main and roughly 5,500 feet of water main. And the reason this project got moved to the forefront is obviously because of the Highway 37 utilities.
They're going to start that in 23?
Yep. West Harmon water main. This would be a continuation of a project that we're working on now. It'd be a loop to the island area, which eliminates the need for a water tower out in that area. It increases fire flows, and it also will allow us to eliminate the water main line that lays on the lake bottom right now. And that's estimated at $630,000. North Harmon and Airport Lift Station. I think this is a very interesting project. It would allow us to eliminate 2 lift stations, the North Harmon lift station and the airport lift station. This project came along as SPN is looking at utility improvements for the property that was just newly purchased. So I think this is a project that we seriously need to consider and we should put on applying for. It's roughly the cost for the 2 lift stations is about the same cost to install the new sanitary line, and our O&M costs will go down substantially. During storms, it's 2 lift station areas we won't have to worry about, so it's a huge benefit.
So I'm just trying to think, we've got the one over by the new lift station that we're doing by the daily, we call it the daily lift station.
Yep.
So where is this in relation to that?
So this would be east.
East, right,
So Daily Drive lift station dumps into a manhole roughly in this area, and then all that wastewater comes down and then flows into this lift station, which then continues through.
and then where's this new one that you're,
So right here, we'd be eliminating this lift station.
okay.
It would be flowing through this property, down and around, and then connecting in close to where Ethan Lumber is doing their new development.
It'd be gravity instead of...
Yep, gravity. Yep.
we would eliminate the 2 lift stations and let traffic carry.
Yep.
So you'd have to get them to write off on that, all the landowners on that, an easement?
Yep. So it'd either be easements or future right-of-way. That's planned. This area over here is the biggest question mark, whether we could get easements to go through this property. Yeah, so there'd be some work that would have to be done, but I think it's something worth going after. Another area we looked at was First Avenue, Burr to Foster. This section from Main to Burr has already been completed with new water and sanitary sewer. This is an area that has 4-inch cast iron and 8-inch VCP sewer. It's still straight face curb. It'd be complete reconstruction, new curb and gutter, new sidewalk. And then that section from Foster to Sanborn then would be completed after this was done. Another lift station, the Ullman South Harmon lift station, project cost of $859,000. This lift station too is roughly 50 years old, so it'd be another good lift station to replace. Or excuse me, the previous one I talked about was First, not Fifth. Yeah. First, before it'd be the same concept, replacing the water and sewer from Burr to Foster. The section on First, back. Should go the arrow twice.
Oh, there it is. I couldn't find my mouse.
One more.
So the section from Main to Burr on First is also updated utilities. We finished this. New street construction as well. Yes, sir.
And you said something at the end of this conversation about, then we're gonna go from there to Foster, or Sanborn.
So it'd be all new utilities.
Oh, it will be.
Yep.
Okay, I got
Yep.
Because Sanborn to Burr is already done.
Right.
Done, yeah, okay, gotcha.
So it'd be a good section of town, then that would have complete new utilities and be done.
Are we having problems in that area, or, you know?
No. I mean, nothing that's been reported, but it seems like, our goal right now is to get the 4-inch cast completely removed and replaced, so we've been targeting those areas. And then Fifth is another one. I kind of explained that before when I thought I was on First. But same concept. So now we get to talk about the overall cost. Those total project costs we talked about are $46.5 million. Right. Outside of the $30 million, it's roughly $3.4 million over 5 years, which isn't out of line for what the pace we've been doing recently, which I know recently we have been doing a lot more than historically. If we did not have any funding or grants with this, you can see the rates up here. Rates would increase, and we showed the rates differently. We showed them as a surcharge rate, so it's divided out individually between accounts, and then we showed it as an increase of just specifically rates based off the amount of water usage, and the lower is shown on 5,000 gallons used. So just for an increase in rates, your water would be 8.43. Your sewer increase would be 30.26, and that's on top of our base. The very top one shown in gray, that's our ground storage. That's up there just because we know we need an additional $4.50 on our water.
And we did talk about that during budget, that the cost came in more and that we would be bringing back a proposal for that, for the additional cost.
Now, the preliminary direction from the state is that a municipality of our size is going to roughly see a 30% grant at roughly around the 45 million, and that's why I targeted close to 45. So anything under that would be potentially grant that we're not utilizing. Stephanie, do you want to touch on our ARPA?
Yep. So the other thing that we've been looking at is the use of the new ARPA money that the city's been allocated. I have that breakdown, but I don't want to lose Joe's spot in the slide here. It's about 2.86 million, I believe, is what the city of Mitchell's second allocation was. One thing that the state is now saying is that they're going to have a criteria for considering grant funds towards whatever projects you're putting on your application. And maybe that maximum is going to be 30% of the cost or whatever number they finalize. They're also talking like if you use your local ARPA money that you've been given, that they'll match that above whatever limits they set on grant funding. So it might make a lot of sense for the city to use that local money that we've received as part of these projects because of the opportunity to get additional grant money to match it. I guess when Joe and I have been talking about it, the main thing is whatever way we can get the most in grant funds possible, because that's going to reduce the cost for citizens here. So that's been our initial discussions. And really when you get into the requirements on the ARPA funding, it is a lot different than the CARES Act funding. Most cities are looking at water and sewer projects just because it's going to be the easiest to get funded. Even when we initially thought 911 or other first responders' wages could be covered, you have to be able to document that the majority of their time is spent responding to the pandemic, where before in CARES Act, they just assumed you were. So I don't know if we'd be able to meet that threshold in verification. The other allowable things are providing a premium pay above what you've already paid to first responders who are responding to the pandemic. And then like vaccine incentive kind of things. There are some cities you may have seen in South Dakota that did a lottery for people who got vaccinated by this time they were entered into a city lottery. So the majority of who I've been talking to sound like they're going to be using it for their water and sewer infrastructure projects, which is what I refer to as the city utilities because it's the only ones we own. So.
Question. In the past on our water source and whether we had a first and second source and looking at that, we looked at the pipe size increase, I think, between Tripp and Mitchell to increase our water capacity, and that was one way that BY said we could do that. Has that been looked at in any of this from a water source standpoint?
So we're currently working on our water source project. It seems like it's always evolving, but we are not to the point that we could put a project into this funding.
I guess the one thing that I'll say that's probably okay with that is we do have a major, you had another major water project that you had financed previously that's coming off payment. So, you know, there's a possibility of rolling that into whatever you end up doing for the secondary source, but not knowing what that costs.
Because I think that was like 50 miles and to increase the pipe diameter, and it would get us our base up to 4-point-some million gallons per day or something.
It increases our flow, but it really doesn't give us a secondary source.
It doesn't give us a secondary source, but it increases
the BY, you're still at
right. It increases the capacity though, and, and capacity could be a constraint on growth and everything else.
We're also kicking around ideas to get a second source.
Yeah.
So that if we were to lose BY, you know, our issues this year were that BY couldn't produce the amount of water that they had hoped to. So.
Okay.
I just want to remind everyone, this is just setting us up to be able to potentially get the funding. This is not the decision, nor the next time we bring it up. That won't be the decision. That'll just be allowing us to see what we can get for grant, and then from there we can pick and choose, or we could go all in. But the decision, this is just to start the thought process on where we want to go and where we want to be.
And I guess another comment would be everything that you're seeing up here assumes that 100% of the costs are being financed, that we're not using any of our local ARPA money, and that there's no grant funds received. So this is kind of like the worst case scenario, not worst case, but that would be the maximum cost scenario. That obviously would go down as we would find out how much would be available in grant funds, or if we applied our local funds as well. The ones that you'll see coming up at the second meeting in December as a hearing, depending on council's feedback would be everything on the list but the shaded one, and first and fifth would not be on there. That would be on a second ask. So we thought it was important that, first of all, the questions about any of these projects get answered, but then also to kind of talk through what that might look like for the city too. I mean, that's a lot of projects to take on.
I know we're really early in this process, but have they indicated at all what the timetable is for the grants? Have they indicated, is it like 5 years? I see you're out there, little ways, but.
2026 is when everything has to be spent.
Okay.
So we're going to try and leave, I think there's only one date on there that has 2026, just in the event that if any of the projects run long, we're still able to complete them and get them, done so we can get the funding.
And who knows, that might change as they get into this and they're seeing, I know one of the proposals at the national legislature was giving some flexibility to states with timelines to get those done, just because it's difficult to have the entire state trying to do the same amount of projects in a short amount of time too. But there's no guarantee any of that would be extended. Yeah, countrywide, not just statewide. Good point.
And this project, or this scenario, does not include anything that's going through the federal legislation right now.
The Build Back Better.
Yeah. What we really want to do, though, is we want to be sure that we've outlined what the priority projects would be for the city of Mitchell. We want to go forward with the application process so that they're out there, because it might be as soon as March that they're considering who would get what type of grants. And with that being said, that means we have to have our stuff in by January to get their application time frame. So that's why we'd be looking at a hearing the second meeting in December, knowing that when you get the final of what the grant amounts are going to be and what the costs are going to be, you can always choose not to move forward with the project, but at least we're on the list.
Joe, can you explain again the difference between the surcharge and the increased rates?
I think I'll let Stephanie explain
okay.
that.
And I don't look at it, when you look at the increase of rates surcharge, don't look at it as a surcharge. Just think of it as the base. If we add that cost onto the base for everybody, or if we add it on to the user rate. Because the way the city of Mitchell does our surcharge is we take all of our revenue in, and then we separate out based on what we've already approved for surcharge. So the surcharge isn't necessarily as important. It's just whether you're going to add it to the base rate where everybody sees an increase of $30.26 on sewer, or you're going to add it on to, and I don't know what rate you used it for every unit.
Yep.
Per unit. Or if you want to add in the $2.95 per unit.
And I know that you have already explained that this is getting $0 in for grants or utilizing $0 of our current funds. So obviously it's going to come in lower. We're not going to do it. I mean, we're going to have some funds.
Grant money would affect that.
Because we can't charge that, obviously. So we can run out of town.
Run ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, and so you will see at that hearing, you will have to list what the surcharge amount's going to be for each of those projects in order to apply for funding. I think what would be helpful for me as you move forward with if no one's seeing a project on here that absolutely shouldn't be on the list, if you all agree with what's been proposed, that, yeah, these look like good projects that we should be proceeding with for trying to get some ARPA grant funds for, then it would be good for us to hear a direction. Some of the comments I've heard in the past is you like to maybe not just put everything right on to the base rate because you want to spread it a little bit for maybe someone who's a higher user. If you have feedback like that, that's something that we can take back and look at different ways to structure those rates. Because keep in mind, we just take the surcharge out after we've collected the revenue. So I just remember that was a comment when we went through our, I guess the comment that I'm thinking of is when I've heard council say in the past, you don't want all of the increase just going on to the base, because then someone who might be a two-user, 2 people in the household on a set income might have less likelihood of affording it than spreading it out on a higher user. But I think there's opinions on both sides, but if council had direction, it would, we could look at that in the interim before that second meeting in December.
Well, I'm just, numbers-wise, obviously, the $30 million project sticks out, and you wonder whether or not it's reasonable. I guess I don't mind it. I mean, if you don't dream big and don't ask for it, then it would never be a possibility. But it, to me, seems to be the one that's kind of out there.
There are.
To me, it would be tough to finish. I mean, say that we got that to finish it by 2026, to me, it seems almost impossible.
And that project is very particular. I mean, that's going to be a certain contractor that does that. That'll be somebody out of Fargo or Minneapolis, because there's just a lot of components that come with it, a lot of mechanical items.
I mean, it's a replacement of the South Wastewater Treatment Plant, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how long did it take us to build it the first time?
I would imagine at least 2 years.
Yeah, maybe
3 years.
longer. Yeah.
But
Okay.
like I said, if we don't decide to go all in, then there will have to be a hybrid of that project, just so we can keep operating and hitting our DANR requirements for discharge.
Right now.
And
you're close to
actually-
The EPA requirement, or DANR requirements. Right.
In some of the new legislation I've been reading too, with that, whatever the new one's called, Build Back Better or whatever it is, they did have some priority points on if you're doing stuff with your wastewater containment. So it might be good to have it on that list just in case another round of funding gets
Sure.
funneled through the state for that as well.
And there is the possibility, they've talked about it, we're not sure if it's certain yet. Like, let's say a project comes in over budget, there may be a possibility of back funding it with these funds. But that's something that they've just stated. It's nothing that's, been written down. So that's not for certain, but that's also a possibility.
And you were stating earlier, Joel, that if we keep the existing plant, more than likely to bring it up to, per code, let's say,
Yep.
it was going to be around $10 million project.
Yep.
That's what I thought I heard you say.
So you could eliminate 30, but you got to add back 10 back.
And
if you're gonna
that's
give-
still
if-
just-
If you get 30% of that funded, you've caught that 10 already.
And that's still just kicking the can down the road.
You're still going to have to do it at some point.
Right.
Right. So then I guess like you pointed out, Steve, the only major project not on here that at least has been discussed by council would be that secondary water source or a redundancy or whatever, yeah.
And I think it's worth noting that 30 million was 20 million 2 years ago.
Oh, my gosh.
That's how much it's increased.
And is it going down now?
And you look at these and it's not like, you can't say that any of this is.
Can you use your mic too? I did get a text from people asking council to use mine.
And you look at these, and none of them are unimportant. I mean, every single one of them have value, so it would be difficult to say, well, that's not important. Everything up there at some point is going to have to be done. If we don't put them on the list, and we just can't ignore them, we have to keep up on things. So I don't think we can say that none of them have validity.
It's the price of having infrastructure. It has to be improved periodically.
It really goes back to the same conversations you had when you did East Central Drainage and Sanborn. The cost of those projects are not the road surface, it's the infrastructure and the utilities underneath the road that are so expensive.
It's like buying tires.
Sort of. On a good note, some of these will be qualified for money that could go into the watershed too,
Yep.
as a grant. So
Yep.
Oh, that's good.
so we would have more additional money to put into Lake Mitchell watershed.
Right.
Yeah, so any of those that would show sewer project costs. I can't add that fast. Well, what about the treatment plant?
You'd be close. Yeah, you'd be rough. It's usually about $1 million per 10.
Per 10?
So it'd be roughly 4 million.
That's awesome.
So say that again. So we'd have $4 million that would go towards
the non-point source grants that we've been using to do improvements in the watershed. So any of those sewer project costs, we could apply for an NPS funds as part of the project where they reduce our interest rate and put that towards the grant.
Nice.
So you will bring this back up in December?
Yep.
Just kind of felt like with this amount of projects and this dollar amount, it deserved its own time to discuss ahead of time to give you time to think about
It
it.
is good.
It is putting the cart way ahead of the horse, but it's just the way that the state is having us do this. If we want the money, or the grants, this is the procedure we have to follow.
Is there any other information that we want to talk about the lake at this point?
I don't think none of that would be directly funded through this FSRF process.
This would have to go to the watershed.
Yep.
State, whatever, DNR rules.
And none of the money that the state has would be applicable to the lake project?
They have not specifically talked about using it for NPS projects, have they? I haven't heard anything. It's all been water and sewer. I guess some of the conversations we've had at council, and we talked about that a little bit at budget, was whether you wanted to use your local money towards projects in the lake, because one of the categories that are allowable is things that you could do, the shoreline stabilization and stuff like that at Lake Mitchell. What I'm saying now, though, is that if the state is going to give us an opportunity where they're going to match grant funds with our local funds, we wouldn't want to miss that opportunity to get more funding towards projects, because this will reduce the cost that our citizens are going to end up paying. So if that comes forward, that they're going to say, yes, if you use your local money, we'll give you even more grant funding, I think hands down we need to go for that.
Absolutely.
Because you're doubling your grant then. So I was glad to hear that, actually. So, like I said in the beginning, our goal is to get as much as we can from the grant funds to do what we need to do locally. So if that's the way you get the most grant funds, then that's how we should do it.
And we'll probably have a better handle of final grant amounts in March if they make that deadline. If not, it'll be June.
And I can send this presentation. Yeah, I will send the presentation out to everybody so you have time to go back and kind of go through things. I know Joe was working on this through Friday and even today a little bit, so just kind of finalizing the projects and numbers. But I just want to remind you that then the second meeting in December, you'll see a public hearing that we'll have to do notice on for those projects that we want to submit by the January 1 deadline to be considered in March. And we have to be in there in order to be considered for the grant funding. So just keep in mind when you see that, that's going to be the maximum dollar if we had no other funds to contribute towards it. So it could be reduced depending on what they decide on grant funding. And also you could at that time then, if we got no grants, you could say, you know what, we want to forego these last 4 and stretch it out farther.
Are these dollars that you put up there, Joel, is there any inflation that's built into that, or is that today's dollars?
No, there is inflation. These days, you just hope you can keep up.
No.
Looks good.
Like the matching grant funds from the state if we use our local funds, I don't think we heard about that till I got your email Friday. So, I mean, that's new information based on most recent guidance from the state. Any other questions on these projects before you see these, the second meeting in December?
And at that meeting, you're going to, if there is a recommendation to increase rates, of where we fall with a Class A city with others. And you've showed us before, and we're right in the middle,
Yep.
and that's a good place to be.
And Joe put that information together, but the problem is the information that we have for the other cities is old, Because first of all, they have their projects that they've done in the last year or two like we have, and it's not going to have their application funds too. So I will try and get a more current number from the first class cities to have that as comparison data for you in the second meeting, and then we can give you a better idea of the increase on each one and what the percentage points will be and that kind of thing too. Does that sound good? Okay.
That'll be at a regular council meeting?
Yeah, because it's a public hearing, so Joe will have to do the notice, I think it's 10 days prior to the hearing.
Yep.
So that'll go out between your first and second meeting, actually probably right after the first meeting, to hit the publication timelines. But again, we're doing that so we can hit the January 1st deadline, so we can be considered at their March application times. So,
Joe, are you pretty comfortable that there's some hot spots in town that have taken care of over the last few years with really bad water?
Yep.
In that old piping, and you think with this plan, we're never going to get ahead of it. I can't remember how many miles we said we had to replace, but it was crazy.
27.
$200 million worth.
$200 million?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're
Back
thinking
in
that,
time, which has gone up substantially.
right,
In the meantime.
right.
We do have one other area that's like 2 or 3 blocks where we do experience some rusty water. We'll plan to take care of that next year with city dollars. There are still some drainage area concern areas in town that still need to be addressed, but still master planning for those. That'll be coming forward in the future. So it's just always a moving animal, I guess.
and you're still going to see ongoing water and sewer replacements as part of our annual operating budget. We've been doing $600,000 to $800,000 of that a year.
Yep.
This year's more with fifth, I'm going to say the wrong numbers again, 5th, 9th, and 10th, I believe.
Yep.
So we've got a lot of that this year, but I mean, that's not coming out of the budget. That's why all of this is financed, so you can continue to do the ongoing maintenance that we do out of our current cash.
And there's always, shovel-ready projects. There's always something to be said to have a project that's ready to go. So you don't know what additional funding is going to be
Right.
available. EDA will have a bunch more money or anything like that we can put forward to some of these other projects. There's just so much money coming down the pipeline, you can't keep up.
Hopefully, as the Build Back Better kicks in, now that they've pretty much approved it, we'll see a lot of money come.
Yeah, like I said, one of the discussions with the Build Back Better is removing the contaminants in your wastewater. So maybe that's something that would have additional grant funding that we could put towards the 30,000, or 30 million, 30,000, I wish. Sorry, 30 million. So you just don't know what's going to come down. I think we need to be prepared for it. And I think, at least from tonight and moving forward, the 2 major things that we know are not on here that council just needs to be aware of is that secondary water source, and then, like Joe said, that master storm drainage plan throughout the city. You have 3 different drainage basins that have been studied, so we're going to have to come up with a plan to address those in the future as well. Separate and aside from this great 46 million.
And every lift station that's on this list is at or over 50 years old.
Wow.
It's almost as old as me.
Any other questions or clarifications on any of these? Like I said, originally I thought we'd have more ARPA discussion, but now that the state's saying they'll match that money, it makes sense to double our grant funds if we can first. If that doesn't work out, we can come back and discuss other options after that.
That was the 2.8, and so it could be
Yep, and
5.6,
actually,
or whatever the approximate
yep.
number was.
Where's the mouse at? It just disappears on me.
Oh, it's on the screen.
Where? Oh, okay, here it is.
Doubling your money's not bad at all. It's almost like having your money in a bank today.
So here's the, I did just look at the, I don't know if you guys can see that very well. I pulled up today the allocations for really the first-class municipalities down You can see Sioux Falls through Harrisburg. Mitchell, we're at 2,080,000. I can't read that far away. Somebody who has better eyesight than me.
0.803.
Okay, yeah. So I believe that was based on population. But you never know, too. Last time we had 3.6 for ARPA money, and we ended up with 4.2 because we got additional allocations from cities that didn't spend there. So, I mean, like Joe said, there's a good point to be made about having as much as you can ready to go in case other funding does become available. I know. Any other questions that we can answer, or? No? That's all we had for you today, Kevin and Mayor.
Okay, anybody else have anything else they want to discuss while we're here, or? We covered everything. Any other things, any other topics? Well, then we can be adjourned.
Only 9